Well, we're both really excited to be here, and I know we've learned a lot that we're going to be taking back to our own newsroom, so thanks for having us. We're going to tag team this a little bit this morning. So we're going to be looking at collaboration through the lens of a 126-year-old news organization, and I think it's a really exciting time and a really key moment for the Journal. In the last few months, we've officially moved our product team in the newsroom, which is a new thing for us to be doing. And we're in the midst of restructuring our newsroom for deeper digital collaboration. So it's really an exciting time for us to be shaping our future, really. And I think the foundation for this change really took root during the redesign of our site, which we launched almost a year ago in April 2015. And during this process, there was a real shift in the way that the newsroom and product and technology and the business side interacted with one another. So it happened almost by accident, but I think it's really resulted in some meaningful changes and really some official structural changes. So it was great that our leadership recognized that that was working and has adopted those changes in the newsroom. And it also came at another good time for some other projects that we were working on.
So I think as we looked at last year, I would say one of the big headlines has been third-party platforms and how we work as an organization, especially a legacy organization like our own, with third-party platforms. And in large part, the newsroom has held a lot of those relationships, especially with social media tech companies, and really changing the way that we were working as an organization has helped us be much more strategic with that and aligned in our goals, so that we make sure we're entering into the right partnerships that make sense for us.
And so in the following slides, we're going to lay out some of the lessons we've learned about collaborating in 3 areas. We're going to talk a little bit about the newsroom, which is sort of a collaboration in its own way, the newsroom's collaboration with the business side, and then the whole company's collaboration with some of our external partners.
I feel like we should also say that we took a very simple approach to talking about a very complicated issue.
So I'll just go to the next slide. So in the newsroom, I mean, we found that really one of the most important elements in collaboration is to have a clear editorial strategy, which is not an easy thing to do with such a large news organization. Everyone has their own ideas of what should be the priorities. And so it's really important that everyone from the top to the bottom has a clear understanding of what the strategy is and what their role is in furthering those goals. And it's definitely not easy. It requires communication. It requires education. It has to be reinforced with training, especially in a huge organization like ours. So when we launched our responsive website and we made mobile a priority, it really required us to retrain hundreds of editors how to build article pages in a new way that they hadn't thought of. And actually, we took it as an opportunity to empower editors who hadn't built these pages before to build them. And I think it was great because it demystified a lot of how does this get on the web. You know, we come from a long history of sort of print, and then you had this sort of crack team of people who would take the print and put it online. And you know, that was about 13 years ago when I started working at the Journal. And we've really come such a long way where we have the editors who are publishing it for the paper, responsible for publishing on all of our platforms. So they're publishing it for the web, they're publishing it for our apps, they're publishing it to newswires often, Dow Jones Newswires. So it was really a great opportunity to explain the priorities, to reinforce those, and it's really not over. I mean, you can't train hundreds of editors and then just say, go off and, okay, now you know what you need to do, go do it. You have to constantly reinforce it with that training. So that's really one of the most important, but probably the hardest thing to do. The next thing is not to underestimate physical proximity. We talked in a session yesterday about all the virtual ways that people can collaborate, and we definitely do use all of those tools at the Journal, but we can't underestimate the value of having people sitting next to one another. And you know, there's really value in overhearing a comment or a problem that you might be able to offer a solution to. So it's almost this sort of serendipitous collaboration. But I think one of the best examples of this is at the Journal was the creation of the Hub. And I was one of the sort of founding members of the Hub. And for the first time, this really brought editors from different disciplines together, sitting together in the newsroom, and sort of this hub and spoke kind of seating arrangement. So it was, the page one editor, the people managing the homepage, the video team, the visuals teams, and now we've incorporated the social media team. So all these people are sitting together. They're able to make really fast decisions in real time about how we cover the news. So we're starting to see the evolution of this with our audience engagement team, and now product coming into the newsroom. And so I think it's just incredibly powerful that when you have these people sitting with different skills and expertise, that they can really solve problems in new ways.
Exactly. And to add to that, obviously we're a global publication. So we have global teams that also need to be united. So in addition to that day-to-day news reporting and collaboration, we need to make sure that we're all communicating and handing off to different time zones and regions, which is a complicated endeavor. A lot of the tools that have been mentioned before are tools that we have at our disposal. Slack has been something really big in the newsroom, but I'll also tell you GChat continues to be a big way for us to communicate, and much to my chagrin and challenges, my email inbox continues to be a huge place of where we communicate. And finding ways to streamline that process and figure out ways to not have that be burdensome on folks is really important. In addition to those kinds of communication tools, we also share documents in Google Docs, for example. We also use Trello to make sure that as we're putting together all of those Google Docs, we can say to someone who's just jumping into a project, hey, we have all of this data that we already collected. We have all of these documents that you might need to reference. And you can just go there and spider out to whatever it is that you need. We also, through those same tools, we're really having conversations about things that maybe somebody didn't even think about when they're working on a project. I head up the audience team, and the audience team touches a lot of the projects that have been in the works, sometimes for months before we're even really hearing about that. That's something we're trying to improve. But through these shared documents, we can look at, a section editor's whip list and see what those works in progress look like, and get an inkling of what's coming in the following days or weeks or what have you. Another big thing for us was really bringing the audience analytics team into the newsroom. In the past, that was really something in the realm of the business side, and we would go to them and ask them to give us some analysis of how our stories were doing or how a section was doing. And so last summer, we built an analytics team. It's a small team. We'd like it to be much more robust. But I promise you, the demand and the interest in the data is huge. What I'd say is, I think for a long time, we've had data in the newsroom, obviously, through those kinds of reports that I'm describing, but Chartbeat, for example. But there were many different ways of talking about that data, and also a sense that we were drowning in the data. A lot of numbers, a lot of questions about what we should be looking at, and bringing that analytics team into the newsroom really helped us have discussions about what the right numbers were to be looking at and how we can make informed decisions. Doing a report looking at publish times, for example, helped us to really start parsing apart when we were publishing, but also what kind of content we're publishing, and pairing that journalistic gut that's so incredibly important with some data to help inform those decisions, rather than just guessing that something might be working.
And also, now that we've moved product into the newsroom, we're seeing fresh ideas surface to the top. I really think this is because previously the newsroom didn't know where to go with their ideas, and now sort of that is owned by them, and so that makes it a lot more easy for their ideas to come and for us to collaborate. So we do this through official innovation challenges, the way that Gannett and USA Today do, but we also do it through unofficial conversations and brainstorming sessions, and a big part of that is just people didn't know where to bring their ideas before. So one great example of that is we recently launched curated election push alerts. So we wanted to do something in our app around election season, and our mobile app team had this idea, and we thought it was great, and we really quickly moved on it within a few weeks. And it really took collaboration between between our iOS and Android developers. It required changes to our editorial tools, so tech was heavily involved. And of course, it required us to teach the editors how to approach a new kind of push alert and how to put that into their workflow and how to identify what would make a great election push alert. So a lot of moving parts, but I think now that product is in the newsroom, we're able to sort of identify the need, reach out to the right people, and connect everyone pretty quickly. All right, so the next slide is talking about how the newsroom collaborates with the business side. And again, I'm going back to this idea of having a clear newsroom strategy. So, if you're going to approach conversations with the business side, you need to approach it from a position of clarity and about what are your priorities. And I think they should equally come with their sense of what their priorities are. And hopefully these priorities align, but they don't always align, and that's when you have to have conversations, potentially compromise. But I think when everyone has clear goals and then it can articulate those goals, it makes it easier to identify opportunities, potential pitfalls that we can face together. And ideally, you're working to make sure that these strategies align. We also meet weekly with sort of a cross-departmental group, and we make sure that we have buy-in from the right stakeholders, especially in a big organization that has many brands, MarketWatch, Barron's, The Wall Street Journal, Dow Jones Newswires. So sometimes that means you have to have a big kickoff meeting to make sure everyone is on the same page. Sometimes it feels like that meeting is too big, but then you can sort of make a smaller group to go off and tackle the details. But when everyone feels like they're in the know, then that makes it a lot easier to get buy-in from folks and have consensus on the priorities.
And during those meetings, we really started tackling the idea of shared data and a shared language around that data. So much like we were discussing in the newsroom, having that kind of discussion with the business side is incredibly important. Quite often, we were looking at different numbers or looking at similar numbers, but finding those numbers in different ways, which can kind of skew things. Even semantics, learning the language that the business side uses when talking about that data and other things is really important. So making sure that we're all in alignment there. During that steering committee that Jennifer was talking about, we really started looking at engagement metrics and KPIs that we wanted to measure across the board, and started lining up what the newsroom was looking at, what product was looking at, what advertising was looking at, and that really starts to tell you a very full story. I think we've talked a lot about our education in journalism and the fact that that kind of business discussion wasn't really at the core of what we were learning, some years ago. And I think that this has really allowed us to start thinking about the journalism as in a holistic way, which is incredibly important and has helped move us forward. The next one is cross-departmental committees, and we really started this thing called the WSJ Steering Committee during the redesign, and the purpose was really to get folks from across different departments together to make decisions that were specifically about the redesign. So you had, obviously you had the newsroom, you had product, which was then not in the newsroom, you had advertising and marketing and technology, of course, and so it was effective because the people that were on that committee were empowered to make decisions. They didn't have to go back to a boss and check in, and there wasn't this long drawn-out process. It was, everyone that was at that meeting could say yes, no, and it was very efficient. And so I think it was important to have, connectors in the organization on that committee who could, make sure, that they were reaching out to the right people to
run it up the flagpole if they needed to. And so we decided that that meeting was so valuable that we decided to keep it after the redesign launch, and it's really become a fixture. I mean, committees kind of makes you go, ugh, it's another meeting. We don't have it every week. If we decide that there's no reason to meet, we cancel it. We don't have it for the sake of having it. Recently, we used it as an opportunity to go and tour our new Dow Jones Innovation Lab that's headed up by Edward Roussel, and they talked about some of the cool things that they were doing, which is a really valuable use of 30 minutes. So we've really found it to be an effective way of communicating things and getting things done. And you know, we share what we're comfortable sharing. You know, we don't tell the advertising team what stories we're working on tomorrow. That's not the purpose of that meeting, but it's really more about products. It's about these off-platform publishing opportunities. So we're talking more about strategic decisions in that meeting. But sometimes the big steering committee is not really the right way to approach a problem. Sometimes you need a SWAT team to tackle a project that's quick, and with a team that doesn't need a lot of hand-holding. So we've done this in a few cases where we just send people off to tackle a problem that's very quick and easy to fix. But one thing I've been mindful over the last couple of weeks is I've started to notice that I'm now in meetings with the same people all day. Like, I'll walk with the same herd of people to a conference room, and then we'll all walk to another conference room. And I think what that's telling me is that maybe we aren't including as diverse of a group as we could be. Maybe there are new people we should bring into the fold. So it's just kind of occurred to me recently that we should be trying to give others an opportunity to collaborate and build those skills out. So I think that's something that I'll be working on when I get back. Another funny thing that we notice in these meetings that everyone seems to be type A. So it can get quite animated and passionate. And then we realize, like Carla said, that we're all saying the same thing, but we're speaking a different language. And then we all joke that we're in violent agreement about something. So it's pretty funny. But at least we're aligned in our own way.
So external partners have presented another way for us to be collaborating. So like I said, you know, many of those relationships had previously been held either some by the business side and some by the newsroom, and the business side would learn about projects that we were doing with an external partner, and that would kind of, you know, make its way to the business side, or the other way. We've made a decision about an external partnership, and here, newsroom, now you're going to do such and such. So what we've done is really rethink the way that we approach all of this. And I think one of the most important ways for us to approach that is to get back to this core idea of knowing who you are 100%, and focusing in on that essential quality that we understand the Wall Street Journal or Dow Jones to inhabit, and what that space is. So something that makes us unique is that we're a subscription business. We are largely focused on increasing our subscriber base and creating that community, filling that community. We have a publicly stated Dow Jones goal to reach 3 million subscribers in 3 years. That our goal will be hopefully met in 2017. So when really thinking about these external partnerships, we need to see, how does this fit? And how does that help us with that goal? And in some ways, I think the fact that we have those very publicly set goals makes it a little bit easier for us to enter into a relationship or not. And so I can tell you a little bit about the work that we've done with Apple News, for example, or Snapchat Discover, just within the past 12 months, less than 12 months. With Apple News, we entered into that partnership by really thinking about what stories we were going to curate and share on that platform. We decided for us that a discrete amount of stories made a lot of sense as a way to introduce a new audience or reach an audience that we know is increasingly mobile. And is likely to interact with us on a cell phone. Snapchat was another big project that, frankly, a lot of people, when I told them we were looking at doing a partnership with Snapchat, they said, the Wall Street Journal and Snapchat, why? That makes no sense. Why would you do that? And I'll tell you, we took a long time to figure out what the right voice was on that platform. And you have to make sure that you're coming from a place of self-knowledge before you can enter into something like that, because the risks are really high. You can cheapen your brand, you can have the first interaction with a new audience not resonate with the same voice that you've provided across platforms. So really coming back to understanding that as a newsroom, and also working with the business side to make sure that the business side understands the journalistic voice and that we understand the business side goals. That's been a huge part of working with these external partnerships. The other thing that I want to mention is this is new for all of us, to have relationships like this with Google. I mean, Nicholas was speaking earlier. We work with Google quite a bit, and it's been a really great relationship, whether it's with Google AMP or working with NewsLab, really figuring out what meets our needs and what moves journalism forward. Those are really core questions that we need to be asking ourselves, and working with the right partners who understand those goals and have deep respect for that is really a positive thing for us. The other part of working with those relationships is having a seat at the table and being able to educate sometimes those partners about the ethics and standards that we hold really dear at Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. And the last part that I would add is really making sure that we're talking about the same key performance indicators, the same KPIs, right? Having a set of metrics that we can all agree on, both, like we said, within the newsroom, with the business side, and then with external partners. And frankly, when you're dealing with these new relationships with external partners, they're figuring it out as we go along as well. So having like I said, a seat at the table to have that conversation isn't only benefiting us. I feel that it actually is benefiting all of us at the end of the day. So that kind of long-term relationship is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as we come onto these off-platform distributed publishing, we really have to keep our readers in mind. We want to be creating a consistent user experience across platforms. We want to make sure that no matter how somebody comes to the Wall Street Journal, that they recognize that it is the Wall Street Journal. And so we've worked really closely with our design and UX team to create experiences that are consistent, whether it is on AMP or on Apple News or on our own website or on our own apps. I mean, sometimes we have trouble with UX between our mobile website and our app. So just making sure that for the users, they're not confused just because they found us on AMP versus our app, and making sure that we have a consistent voice, and that can be through things like the stories we choose to put on Apple News, or the typography that we use. I mean, it can be very broad, but we want to be conveying the Wall Street Journal brand. Let's see. The other thing is we want to be in a position to really react quickly to this changing landscape, and that really means that editorial and tech have to be in very strong alignment. And that can be tricky when the newsroom is real time and the tech is working in sprints, and they don't always line up, and we have to find ways to meet those sort of needs that arise. In the middle of a sprint, something comes up, and sometimes tech can be a bit rigid and about those, and we have to say, look, guys, like we need a spike. So it's been a real education for me working with the tech team. I come from the newsroom, but now I'm heading up product. It's a whole new world. I'm learning a new language, and I'm also teaching them the language of the newsroom. And I think it's been really powerful to have the tech team come and sit in the hub with the editors to see how they work, to see what their workflows are, to see that the editorial tools that they're building really meet the needs of a really increasingly fast-paced, mobile-focused news operation. And I think that we do have a really strong partnership. But tech also has to be responsive to the changing needs of marketing and our advertising department, and and all the things. When ad sales enters into one of these off-platform publishing, they have to sell ads in a new way. So we're really all leaning on tech, which is a little unfair, but that is what it is. So I think that's kind of brings us to the end. I mean, collaboration clearly isn't easy. There's a lot of moving parts. It takes a lot of work. We definitely don't have it figured out, but I think that we are definitely moving in the right direction. And I think even if you have a few people in your organization who understand how important collaboration can be, it can really reap big rewards. And I think as other people see these interactions, they're more likely to want to join in and be part of those conversations. And that's another reason why I'm realizing we need to invite new people, new faces to these meetings. And so when we're in the thick of it, it can be hard to see the progress, but I think as we were preparing for this presentation, we were kind of looking back and actually seeing how far we've come. So we're definitely always learning new things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Questions? Hang on just a second.
You mentioned a challenge of keeping your user experience consistent across platforms. And as a content strategist, I'm just curious, what tools in practice do you use to sort of communicate the brand personality or the UX personality to so many people across departments who are kind of touching the UX design and the content creation?
I can, and you can jump in. So we have a really great head of design, Shay Douglas, and his team has created this something we call the blueprint, and it allows us to refer back to that for consistent font treatments, colors, how we treat authors, and all of the other elements of our stories. And I think that's been a really powerful tool that we didn't have before, and maybe it wasn't really necessary before in the same way. But now, as we come on to all these new platforms, it becomes even more important to reinforce those design and the flow. And they're not always the same. I mean, we're relying on iOS and Android have different features, and AMP and Apple News have different features, but we try to do the best we can to create a consistent experience. And maybe Carla can talk a little bit about Snapchat in that regard.
I would say in terms of content, something that really has helped us is the business side did a lot of analysis of our customer, right? And we created personas and all of these things. And I'll say, I have a good friend who's in marketing who thought it was bizarre that the Newsroom was just getting around to thinking about personas in that way. And I understand her astonishment. It was really helpful for us because we started seeing the connections between the traditional Wall Street Journal subscriber, who is typically older and male, and starting to think about a younger, perhaps female audience. How do you bridge that gap? And we started really thinking about the unification of behaviors and motivations, right? So the Wall Street Journal reader, whether you're young or older, is that you're entrepreneurial, you're aspirational, you have that success gene, right? So we made sure to always think about those things when putting together Snapchat, when we're thinking about how we talk on social media platforms, and making sure that the language always feels consistent. So that it's not pandering. And you can think about optimization for mobile, et cetera, but you never want to dumb it down. So having those things in mind has been helpful.
You described a number of tools that you use to collaborate internally, overseas and within your own offices. Do you worry about security at all?
Sure.
How those communications can be secured, how they can get in and out of your enterprise, and you
Yeah,
might find out about things you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of conversations. I'm part of those conversations with our security team about the tools that we're using. Sometimes people start using things without asking, and then it gets adopted, and then you're kind of in a pickle. But yes, we have a lot of conversations about that. We recently got onto Google Mail and Google, Docs, and everyone. I mean, I think that has been really powerful for collaboration, but it did not come without a long period of, talks with lawyers and the newsroom and everyone about how it was going to be secure and whether we felt protected. So there's definitely a lot of conversations about that. And
we have rolling audits that I've been involved in, particularly for the social team, where we're using so many third-party tools. We're constantly having conversations, and we have a workflow in place to make sure two-factor is enabled, so that we have rolling checks of accounts and names that are there. LastPass is a tool that we use to store all of our passwords and automatically generate new passwords during the offboarding process. things like that. We try to.
Yeah, and I would say we have sort of a, you know, if something happens, like a process that's clearly documented. So if someone sees some weird activity on Twitter or whatever, we are able to act quickly, involve our security team. The newsroom knows what to do. It does happen.
Any other questions? Yep, hang on, Sarah. Back here, sorry about that.
No worries.
Thank you. You mentioned a specific subscriber goal, and I was wondering how some of the platforms you may work on, like Snapchat or whatever, that don't necessarily translate to a subscriber coming in. How do those things interrelate, and how are you going to get to that subscriber goal?
Sure. So something like Snapchat is really a pure audience play. So if you imagine the widest funnel where you can possibly bring in an audience, Snapchat we see as being that wide-mouthed funnel. By our selection, through our selection of the content that we share there, which is core. We're not sharing just light stories. We do a selection. We publish 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and the front of each edition is stacked with hard news. So business news, world news, like what broke today in Brussels. And through that kind of self-selection, who is going to read that story, we believe that we're introducing an audience, a new audience to our content. And I can tell you, I do a lot of social listening, so I'll go on Twitter and see what people are talking about, Snapchat on Twitter, and it's been amazing. I have a collection of comments of people saying that they learned about, you know, negative interest rates on WSJ Snapchat. You know, their 13-year-old son is reading, or daughter, I'm sorry, is reading the journal every morning on Snapchat. So we believe that that is a long-term relationship that we're building and may not immediately pay off, but is definitely something where we're making sure that when that new audience is thinking about news, that they think about the Wall Street Journal, which is incredibly important.
Jennifer Hicks, Carla Zanoni from the Wall Street Journal. Thank you.
Thanks.